Question number 2, the Right Honourable Chris Hipkins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Prime Minister, does he stand by all of his government's statements and actions?
The Prime Minister.
Yes, and especially our efforts to rebuild New Zealand's economy and to support Kiwis with the cost of living. In the last year, wage growth has outpaced the cost of living in the first year of our new government. Compared that to the 13 quarters in a row under Labour, where wages grew slower than inflation. That wage growth comes on top of the cost of living support our government has delivered for Kiwis through tax relief, increases to working for families and family boosts to support Kiwis with the cost of childcare. There's still a lot more to do, which is why we're focused on unleashing investment and clearing away red tape and making sure that we can rebuild the economy and lift incomes for all New Zealanders.
Supplementary. Does he stand by his statement, quote, "The government has no plan and never has had plans to amend or revise the treaty or the treaty settlements we have all worked so very hard together to achieve," end quote? If so, how does he reconcile that with the introduction tomorrow of a government bill that completely rewrites the understanding of the treaty upon which those settlements have been based?
In answer to the first part of the question, yes, and as I have explained in this House before, it is government policy to support this bill to first reading. It is also government policy to give parties a free vote at the second reading. The National Party, which I lead, will not be supporting it, and the only way this bill will become law is if the opposition parties do support it.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker. Has the government received any advice indicating that the treaty principles bill could undermine the full and final nature of treaty settlements already concluded? If so, what was the nature of that advice?
I haven't seen that advice, but what I would say is that the treaty principles, the treaty is not changing and treaty settlements are not changing.
Supplementary. Why does the government believe the principle of active protection, which places upon the Crown a positive duty to protect Māori interests and taonga, should be extinguished by an Act of Parliament?
Well, again, I think I've been very consistent on this point. Our coalition government has a policy to support this bill at first reading, but the parties are then free to support it or not support it at the second reading. The National Party won't be supporting it, and the only way this bill becomes a law is if the parties on the opposition support it.
The point of order, the Honourable Chris Hipkins.
Mr Speaker, the government is introducing a government bill. I'm asking the Prime Minister about the government's policy intention, not what the government's parties may wish to do subsequent to that. By introducing a government piece of legislation, the government, of which the member is still the Prime Minister, as far as I know, is responsible. To say that, oh, well, we're not going to support it later on down the track can't be an acceptable answer when he's being asked a question about a bill that the government is currently introducing.
There are a number of ways to get into that. It's not for me to start making those sort of judgments. I would ask the Prime Minister to, if he wishes to have another look at it, or ask the question again, actually, so I can make a better assessment of where it's at.
Why does the government believe that the principle of active protection, which places upon the Crown a positive duty to protect Māori interests and taonga, should be extinguished by an Act of Parliament?
Well, it is government policy to support this bill to first reading. That's what we're doing. It is also government policy for the parties in the coalition government to be free to support it or not support it in the second reading.
Mr Speaker,
point of order.
The Prime Minister has confirmed that the government are supporting the bill as introduced. I am asking him a question about the provisions in the bill, which he has indicated the government is introducing and supporting. I don't think saying that the government supporting a bill that it introduces negates the fact that he should then answer questions on what the bill actually does.
Yeah, I'm just racking my head for a minute, trying to think of previous situations. I can think of one around superannuation way back at the beginning of MMP, where exactly that position was taken and accepted by the arrangements in the House. Point of order, the Honourable Shane Jones, if something new.
Highly likely.
Well, but you've got to be absolutely certain.
Sir, the Prime Minister is clarifying, as other governments have done so, that policy is not static. Policy is dynamic. For the purposes of this bill, the policy will be agreed to the point of introduction. But to suggest that it represents the static form of policy is wrong, and you should have ruled accordingly.
That actually wasn't a point of order. You're giving us a lecture on how Parliament should work. Useful, but not exactly a point of order.
Mr Speaker, the fact remains that when the government introduces a bill to the House, even if they're indicating that they don't intend to progress it all the way through the process, they still have to answer questions on that bill. The Prime Minister and the ministers concerned still have an accountability to the House to explain to the House and to answer questions in the House about the effect of the bill if it was passed. Otherwise, why would it be introduced as a government bill? My question to the Prime Minister is about the effect of the legislation. It's not about whether the government intends to support it further or not. It's about the effect of the legislation as being introduced by the government.
Yeah, and what you're highlighting here is, in my opinion, a collision between the MMP style of government that New Zealand now has and the Westminster style of government, which is the mechanism for how government is delivered. But I will ask the Prime Minister to make a further comment on that.
The only comment I'd add is that the bill hasn't been introduced to the Parliament.
Mr. Speaker, when the Treaty Principles Bill states that the rights of Māori, quote, differ from the rights that everyone has a reasonable expectation to enjoy when they are specified in legislation, treaty settlements or other agreements, so only when they are specified in legislation, treaty settlements or other agreements with the Crown, end quote, is it the government's intention that the treaty itself fall within the definition of other agreement with the Crown?
The bill has not been lodged.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. That can't be a legitimate explanation. The government has made this decision. There's a cabinet minute of it, which has been publicly released. I've quoted directly from the cabinet minute. It's therefore legitimate for the Prime Minister to be asked and therefore answer the question.
Yeah, that would assume that the bill that's going to be introduced is the same bill. The Honourable Simeon Brown.
Was when the bill says X, the bill has not yet been lodged, and therefore the question was addressed adequately by the Prime Minister.
Yeah, it doesn't fully obfuscate ministerial responsibility. The Honourable David Seymour.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, if the Leader of the Labor Party would like to put his questions to the Minister responsible, I'm right here, but I don't see any questions.
Yeah, good. That's a very kind offer.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder whether you could allow me to reword the question, seeing as the Prime Minister refused to answer it.
I will.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When the Cabinet agreed to the introduction of a bill that states that the rights of Māori differ from the rights that everyone else has a reasonable expectation to enjoy when they are specified, only when they are specified in legislation, treaty settlements or other agreements with the Crown, end quote, was it the government's intention that the treaty itself fall within the definition of other agreement with the Crown?
And as I said in my earlier answers, the first position I'll make is that it is government policy to support this bill to first reading. It is also government policy that parties are free to vote at the second reading. The National Party will not be supporting it, and it won't become law unless the opposition parties do so.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
I think I can anticipate the point of order, but make it.
I didn't ask him any question about the bill as potentially introduced. I asked him a question about a decision that the Cabinet has taken, the minute of which has now been publicly released, and I asked him about the Cabinet's intention in making that decision.
Does the Prime Minister want to respond to that?
I said it is government policy to support this bill to first reading.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to repeat the question again.
No, you're not accepting the answer, which is probably a reasonable answer, given that Cabinet would have known at the time that it was supporting the bill that it was not going to get sufficient support to pass. It's not unreasonable. You're asking another question, I think, about whether or not that has implications for the treaty itself.
I'm asking a question about the interpretation of the decision that the Cabinet has just made, and agreed to. That decision has been made. There is a Cabinet minute that confirms that decision. Asking the Prime Minister to explain a decision that the Cabinet has already made, that the decision has been, where that is publicly minuted and recorded, is not unreasonable to expect that he will answer that more than just simply saying that it's the government policy to support it.
Well, but that is an answer. And we could go around forever and ever if that is the same question asked and the same answer given.
Well, point of order, Mr. Speaker, it cannot be the case that the government can make decisions and then not be willing to answer questions on the impact of the decisions that they have taken. It is their number one accountability to this House to explain the decisions that they have taken as a government. They have taken a decision around particular definitional issues around what rights of Māori are or aren't under the treaty principles bill that they're going to introduce. And I'm asking him a question specifically about their decision that they have already taken. I didn't ask him about the passage of the bill, didn't ask him about their intentions further down the track. I asked him about the implications of a decision they have already taken.
Ask your question again.
When the Cabinet decided to support the introduction of a bill that states, quote, that the rights of Māori differ from the rights that everyone else has a reasonable expectation to enjoy only when they are specified in legislation, treaty settlements or other agreements with the Crown, end quote, was it the government's intention that the treaty itself fall within the definition of other agreement with the Crown?
A point of order, the Honourable David Seymour.
Mr. Speaker, in the spirit of being helpful to the House, the member is...
No, sorry. Points of order are heard in silence.
It's not that novel concept. The member is quoting the body text of a Cabinet paper, not a recommendation, not a piece of legal drafting, the body text of a Cabinet paper. He's actually incorrect to say that that's what the legislation does. And when it is tabled tomorrow, I'm sure he will see that.
Well, that's very interesting. I mean, I think the point is the question has been addressed. Prime Minister might like to say something further. Doesn't want to.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister cannot possibly have answered the question. This is quite a significant issue. This is a government piece of legislation. The Prime Minister is the Prime Minister for all government legislation, not just the things that are inconvenient or convenient to him. And he has to be able to answer questions on all decisions the Cabinet has taken. To simply say, oh, well, it's not a decision of Cabinet that we're going to subsequently agree with further down the track, isn't a legitimate answer. This is a decision that's been taken. Asking the Prime Minister to explain it, that is his job.
But it's a simultaneous decision. And look, I don't want to reach for the books and start getting out a number of Speaker's rulings from Speaker Wilson. But the fact of the matter is the question has been addressed, not satisfactorily, and that's acknowledged inside Speaker's rulings that questions may not always be answered satisfactorily to the satisfaction of the questioner. But that doesn't mean that we go on forever on a particular question line.
Supplementary question. Does he stand by his statement, quote, we want to work with Māori, we want to be able to partner, end quote? If so, how does that align with the Waitangi Tribunal's view that the bill the government is intending to introduce is, quote, poorly designed, not informed by consultation with Māori, not justified by robust policy analysis, and risks destroying the very foundation of the constitutional arrangements of this country?
Well, I would say to that member, we are wanting to work with Māori on some of the biggest challenges and opportunities this country has. You see us doing that with respect to how we're driving immunisation rates for under 2-year-olds, partnering with Māori health organisations to do so. And think about the way that we're working around emergency housing projects, for example. We want to improve outcomes for Māori and non-Māori, and we're going to continue to do that.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister appears to have...
Just wait for the House to settle down.
The Prime Minister appears to have selectively ignored the substance of the question, which was a direct quote from the findings of the Waitangi Tribunal, which were released yesterday.
That's right, but there were multiple legs to the question. He's answered one of those which meets the criteria required. The Honourable Shane Jones, point of order.
So we're at the point of the House being brought into disrepute.
Well,
That question was addressed. It was a comment taken from a recommendatory body. The Prime Minister addressed the question. You just articulated that's the threshold. To continue to relitigate that is to invite us all to break that rule. That can't possibly uphold the standards of the House.
thank you for your commentary. The Honourable Chris Hipkins.
Mr. Speaker, what message does it send to Māori and non-Māori alike that in the same week the government proposes to bring forward the introduction of a divisive bill that threatens our shared understanding of the nation's founding document, his government is also sacking 40% of the staff working in the agency responsible for supporting Crown Māori relationships?
The member is conflating two separate issues that make no sense. We are making sure that we are delivering outcomes, and we're making sure we get a right-sized public service to do that. What we're not prepared to do is have an 84% increase in spending that drove up inflation, drove up interest rates, put the economy in recession, and then lays off people from work. So we are making sure we deal with the spending. It's not wasteful. We make sure that we're driving down inflation, interest rates, we're running the economy.